Nothing is more practical than finding God.
Then falling in love in a quite absolute final way.
What you are in love with, what seizes your imagination,
will affect everything.
It will decide what will get you out of bed in the morning,
What you do with your evenings.
How you spend your weekend.
what you read,
Whom you know,
What breaks your heart.
and what amazes you with joy and gratitude.
Fall in love.
Stay in love.
And it will decide everything.
I would define the true self as being holy, as being who God made us to be. And I think at the heart of this is love, and that we both love ourselves and allow God to love us as well. And this can be really hard. Part of the true self, what it really is the acceptance of who we are, and that we are both blessed and broken. That both of these things are a beautiful part of who we are, of who God created us to be.
The true self is the person whom God created and also the person whom God invites us to be. You know, the point is that that person, that true self, is a really beautiful person because that's the person whom God made.
When I think about my true self, I imagine this ball of energy sitting right inside my chest, kind of like this miniature sun. And a lot of times it's blocked by things of this world, selfishness, ambition, pridefulness. But when I let those things fall away, that energy fills me. I have this enthusiasm, this love for life. And the thing is that ball of energy is really the power of God. It's God filling me up with life every day.
If I were to tell like a 5-year-old child, like my nephew or something, what true self is, I'd probably look at them and say, what do you like to do? What makes you happy? That's your true self. That's what defines who you are right now. And that's true self in probably the tiniest nutshell that I can give you.
In the parable of the talents, Jesus presents a story of a landowner who gives money to his servants in the hopes that they'll bring back more earnings after the master returns. And he gives 2 of the servants more money than the last servant. When the master does return, he checks and sees how much they've earned, and it turns out that the first 2 have multiplied the amount of money he gave them, while the last one has buried the money in a hole and has not returned with any extra money. And the master rebukes the servant and tells him that he should have at least put the money in the bank so that he could have collected interest on the money he started with. And I think this really reflects the Christian view of true self, in that God calls us to do something with the gifts that we're given. And while not everyone is given equal gifts, we're called to at least try to use them for other people and for God.
So your true self changes over time for a couple main reasons, one of which is simply self-discovery, and the other is where you are in life. Your true self when you're 5 is different from when you're 15 or when you're 55. When you're 5, oftentimes you want to be a firefighter or a teacher because that's all you know. And as you grow and mature, you realize what options are available to you and are able to better discern God's plan for you. You may have a plan when you're 5, but that plan is going to change, and you ultimately want to find God's plan and your true self in that.
Everyone's true self is going to evolve over time. Specifically for me, when I was 5 years old, I loved to read. When I was in high school, I loved hanging out with my friends and going out with them. In college, I loved doing Steel Bridge and being at St. Mary's. And beyond college, who knows? If I get married and if I have kids, my life is probably going to revolve around them. And that's still going to be my true self. So I think that throughout the years, your experiences build upon each other and different people come into your life and they all help you to mold who your true self is and to figure out who your true self is.
When I was in high school, I would have told you that I had two distinct true selves. On the one hand, I wanted to be like a lot of my friends who were your typical, like, normal, nice people, wore a lot of pastels, got good grades, listened to Coldplay and Death Cab for Cutie. And on the other hand, I really wanted to be this rock star and, dye my hair crazy colors and have like tattoos and piercings and really stand out from the crowd. And neither of those selves were my real true self. It wasn't so much the outward appearance that really was my true self. It was really taking the fearlessness of the rock star and the conviction of the Christian and marrying them together that helped me to find my true self and to find who I really am.
False self is the person in a sense that we think that we should present to the world. I always like to say the false self is usually the one that tries to be cool, mask in a sense that we sometimes feel that we have to wear, or that we're forced to wear. Sometimes it's about making ourselves acceptable to other people. We seek approval, we seek people liking us, and so we sort of put on this mask.
This idea of false self is something that Father Martin really talks about in his book, and is something that I've struggled with and really experienced. I kind of came into college with this ideal, perfect college experience with the perfect group of friends, and really found that when I was seeking that and experiencing it, it wasn't my true self. I found in those experiences that I was feeling empty and I was being someone that I really wasn't and wasn't feeling fulfilled in.
In high school, I convinced myself that I was pre-med. So coming to college, that was the one-track mind that I had. I shadowed multiple times different doctors in different settings and almost passed out in many of those situations. And during this whole process, I really realized that if it was taking this much and having that much of an emotional toll on me, that it just wasn't right.
So I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of this too, we get caught up in trying to be our authentic true self, and we think that, there's only one authentic real me. But I'm not going to talk the same way to my best friend as I am to my boss or to my mom or to my baby cousin as opposed to my grandma. But that doesn't mean I'm not being me. I'm still being my authentic true self, even if it's a slightly different version of my true self.
I think that there's multiple different sides of me. So there's a side that's the deep thinker and the worrier, but there's also like the free-spirited and spontaneous side of me. And I kind of reflected on, does that mean those are false selves that I'm projecting, or can I have multiple selves? And then looking at Jesus as being an example for humans, he was both fully divine but also fully human. And that kind of complexity, I think God has in our lives as well, by making it so that we're true selves and we're kind of displaying different sides. And we have that complexity that Jesus had, just in the lesser degree.
I think a lot of it is noticing in classic Jesuit style, kind of what gives you a sense of peace and confidence and what makes you feel uncomfortable. Eventually you can't keep up that facade.
True self is really listening to yourself deep down. I described it as kind of a glow that appears within you. When you're doing something that just feels right, that brings out the best of you, that brings you joy, and you feel that joy just radiating out, and especially when others can see that and notice that, I think that really is when you're being your true self.
So I think one way that I found I've been able to identify times where I'm at my true self is when I find that I'm visibly excited about what I'm talking about. In those times, my voice picks up, I'm visibly brighter and lighting up. And for example, times that I've talked about my career passions with other people in pursuing global health have been times where it's been identified that that's times where they see that I'm lighting up, I'm visibly excited and energized.
I've been super involved in a lot of different things and a lot of different activities that I hardly have time for myself, but it's helped me to refine who my true self is and to find out what makes me happy, what stresses me out in a healthy way and what stresses me out in an unhealthy way. So while I really wouldn't recommend it, being involved in a lot of different things and trying out a lot of things has helped me to find my true self.
In particular, when I think about people who have affirmed me and helped me to discover the true self, I think of my grandma Nellie, who was my adoptive Cheyenne grandma when I worked on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Montana. And she was always telling me to be a ceremonial woman, calling me to be a sacred woman. And it was really hard for me to accept that and take ownership of that. And I thought of her as this incredible woman who was both Catholic and Cheyenne and led both of these spiritual worlds, and I didn't see that in myself, but she kept encouraging me and inspiring me, and eventually it was through her words and encouragement that I was able to start to take ownership of that.
I found that sometimes I often struggle with identifying characteristics within myself that are a part of my true self. And one thing that's really been essential to me kind of growing and finding out who I am is getting affirmations from others about characteristics that they've noticed are really unique to me. So for example, I've had people within the parish and with the programs that I coordinate tell me that I'm just so enthusiastic every time I'm running something, and that is a characteristic that I would not have saw in myself.
A couple weeks ago, I was at RCIA and a woman asked me what I do, and I decided to just turn it around and ask her what she thought that I did. And she immediately said, oh yeah, of course, you work with people. And that really struck me. And it really kind of gave me a sense of how other people see me and of how they see what excites me and what gives me joy.
I think it's really important to be in touch with God. I think that kind of two-way journey of you entering into a prayer life with God, God will therefore enter into you and help you to discover that true self. And I know for me, I think one of the most important things has been finding God through silence. Just as I'm walking to class or going to bed at night, just taking those silent moments just to let God enter into my life and work in ways that I'm able to discover who I really am.
We tend to try to justify our emotions or think them through and kind of try to set them aside. But the times when I just let myself feel how I'm feeling without overthinking it or trying to change it, those are the times that I think God really works through me. Ultimately, I think it's those times when I'm letting myself feel emotions and talking through them with God, letting myself be vulnerable. That's the times when I'm relying on Him the most, and I think that He's able to work through me because I'm the most willing to listen to Him.
I feel like I'm my true self when I'm doing what I love to do. And when it doesn't make me crazy, it doesn't make me stressed, but instead it just makes me feel like, yes, this is what I should be doing. I'm at peace, I'm calm, I can stop thinking all of my crazy thoughts, and I can just, I can sing, or I can play piano, or I can just do what makes me happy.
Not a linear process. It's not start and then finish, point A to point B. It's an ongoing process. You find tidbits of it here and pieces of it there, and you try to compile those together. And even if you think, oh, I found out exactly what I'm supposed to do, there's more, because God is always calling us to more.
One of the ways that I've found to find your true self is through really good relationships. So I have some really wonderful people in my life, and I feel very genuine and very much so the person God intended me to be when I'm with those people and in those relationships, which is an amazing grace that God has given me. But on the contrary to that, I have some relationships where I think back to times and I don't even recognize the person that I was, and I'm not proud of it, and that's a hard thing to grapple with.
I think that when I'm surrounded by the right kinds of people, they ask me the important questions and they encourage me to pursue my dreams and they laugh with me and they have fun with me. Whereas if I'm with the wrong kinds of people, I get closed off and I get a little bitter and grouchy. And I think it's important to just keep my friends close.
I think that the times when I go out of my comfort zone and I'm willing to trust in God and take that leap of faith, those are the times when I'm really discovering who I am as a person. I really like to be adventurous. I like to challenge myself. And I think that those are the times when I always discover a different part of me that God's kind of been hiding just for that moment and for me to discover it through that leap of faith.
So I have this really distinct memory. I'm sitting in an Arby's with my grandparents in Atlanta, Georgia, spring break, senior year of high school, thinking about where I want to go to college. And my mom calls me and tells me I was waitlisted to the last school I was waiting to hear from. And in that split second when I was talking with her, I decided to go to the University of Michigan, and I was so confident in my choice and just had this assurance in this moment of enlightenment that this was God's plan for me, this was His will. And I decided and never looked back, and I'm so glad that I'm here and know that this is where I'm supposed to be.
One of the things that Father Martin talks about in his book is comparing himself to other Jesuits and how that can become a trap. And I definitely feel that I fall into that in my own life. I have some really wonderful people in my life, but with that comes the battle between they're really good at this or they're really good at that, which is fine, but not falling into I want to become them or I need to be just like them, because that would be not being true to myself and the person that God intended me to be. So I think that's something we all need to be aware of, and you can incorporate traits, but maybe not try to encompass a whole person, because that's not you and not what God intended.
One thing that I've found myself to kind of be guilty of is trying to identify moments where I'm at my true self in that moment in time. And I felt that with that only brings anxiety and trying to pay attention to things I shouldn't be paying attention to in that moment. And it's in those times where I don't think about what I'm doing, how it might relate to my true self, or how God's working in my life, that I feel a sense of ease and presence and belonging that is undeniably my true self.
I think what gets in the way most of my becoming who I am at my deepest, best self is trying to balance all of the different things that I'm doing, my family life and my schoolwork and my music. I get distracted and I forget to remember what's really important.
One of my best friends in high school was what I thought was the perfect model of the Christian teen woman. And instead of looking at her and saying, like, she's doing really well for herself, I'm so happy for her, I really looked and said to myself, how can you be more like her? How can you do the things that she does so that you can be the same as her? And trying to be like her caused me much more heartache and many more problems than if I had just kept on trying to do things my way.
I think it's important to be our true selves because it's who we were made to be. For example, you could use a spatula to cut a sandwich in half, and it would work. But a spatula is really made to flip burgers and to flip pancakes. So in the same way, when we are following our true selves, when we're being our true selves, we are being utilized to fulfill our true purpose from God.
It's kind of mysterious, but I think that, as you get closer to God, as you seek God, you come to know yourself better because more things are peeled away. So as you come to know God, you're invited to let go of certain things that keep you unfree and that prevent you from getting closer to God.
So I feel that finding your true self is important because it brings you a sense of inner peace. And I think that when you really realize what God is calling you to do and what his place in this world is for you, that feeling of peace and just comfort of within yourself is beyond words.
I'm a really cheerful person. 95% of the time, I am just happy and joyful and glad to be here. And I really believe it's because I'm being myself in every moment of my life. I'm living the way I want to live, and I'm living the way that God has designed me to live.
So in this process of moving from your false self to your true self, of finding God and growing closer to God, I have found that my kind of natural sinful tendencies have sort of faded away, and I've become more loving and more generous. For example, in the past, when I would have been quick to answer or reply with a cutting comment or gossip, that I now have the patience to reply in love or in silence. Sometimes, it just takes me a few seconds to hold back and to not reply in that kind of cutting way.
I found that it's really important to be in relationship with God when trying to find your true self, because ultimately it's his vision and we're all made in his image. So I think they have to go hand in hand.
We as Catholics believe in the idea of free will. God gives us a choice whether to accept or reject our true selves. And by accepting our true selves, we can share in his eternal joy and become who he really wants us to be.
Finding your true self, for me, is inseparable from growing closer to God. If we are truly delving into our true self, we're delving into who God made us to be. God, who knit us in our mother's womb, created us. God is part of our true self. And discovering those things is mutual. In growing to know ourselves, we grow to know God. In growing to know God, we grow to know ourselves and the way that he works in our lives, the way that we encounter the world. And when we accept our brokenness and our blessedness, when we accept our true self, we are accepting God and his work in our lives and his creation of who we are.
Once you kind of realize that the person that God made is beautiful and holy in his or her own right, it lets you relax a little bit and say, you know what, I don't need to be anyone else other than, who God created.